I promised myself and I promised you that I would write every single day. But this has been kind of a nope day. Hey, it's Father Roderick. It is day 30 of my journey towards writing my first fantasy novel. And as I explained yesterday, I was hoping to start actually writing my first draft on February the 1st, which means that I have to get all the plotting and all the canvassing and all the outlining done in the last 2 days of January. I've got one day left. And so for today, I had high hopes of, really getting ahead. And instead, I don't know what it was. I just had it's just one of those days. It's probably related to me having ADHD. Sometimes my brain just shuts down. There's just so much going on. And in addition to writing, I'm currently editing a video course on the Celtic Saints, which I filmed in Ireland, which is a huge amount of work. Editing is very labor intensive. And I've got a deadline for that as well, because this upcoming Monday is the first evening here in the parish. And so I think I just put way too much on my plate. And as a result, I just shut down in the sense that I just couldn't focus on anything. My brain was just constantly going in all directions. However, I know what to do in situations like this. A few years earlier, when I didn't know that I had ADHD, I would have freaked out. I would have either just tried to force myself to get things done and be super frustrated and stressed, or I would just escape. I would just play video games all day long. Neither of these two actually help. And so I've learned that in situations like this, first thing you need to do is accept it. You just have to work. Your brain is a tool. It's a gift that I've been given by God, but doesn't always mean that it works perfect. And so there are just days that I have to accept that things don't go my way. And even with a lot of effort, still nothing comes out. But, and here's the second thing that I've learned. I tend to, at an end of what I call a nope day, it's where nothing really seems to work. I used to kind of gaslight myself, telling myself, oh, you suck, you've done nothing, you're lazy, you're a failure, all that self-talk. Now I know that it's very common for people with ADHD to think like that. But I've also learned that it's not true. And that's where journaling has helped me a lot. So when I have negative thoughts like that about a day where I just can't seem to do anything right, I note down what I have been able to do. And that puts things in perspective. And then if you add everything up, it's not a lost day at all. So what I did manage to do is even though I felt like this is not going to work today, I did sit down and I set my timer, my little, this one, and I set it I set it to 5 minutes. Actually, it still shows 5 minutes. I said, I'm just going to do 5 minutes. I'm just going to sit and I'm going to work for I can do 5 minutes, even in this state. And for 5 minutes, I'm going to write down the overall structure of my book. So this is not the chapter by chapter outline that I need to be able to start writing, but this is just basically the 4 acts. And that I can do in 5 minutes. And then before I knew it, I was actually writing for about half an hour. And I think it still helped. It also showed me that there's a lot to be done. But that overall structure is so important. So what is that overall structure? Well, the first act is where we get to know our protagonists in the world that is normal for them. So this is the world before they receive the call to adventure. And so that for Tim and Elara, this is the world of their monastery. It describes their characters. There are some interactions. There's some stuff happening. There's a bit of action as well. I mean, you've got the first attack on the monks and the attempt to steal the codex and all that. And then you have that initial kind of call for Tim and Elara to become scribes, but obviously that's not as easy as it sounds, and so there's some resistance there, etc., etc. And then you have the big life-changing event, which is the stealing of the Codex Fabulae, and almost all the monks are killed. And then in the second act, the two of them actually leave the world behind, their familiar world, and they enter into a new world, which is the world of the adventure. And this is the phase where this is a positive road, right? They are entering this new world, they discover, they learn, they grow, they meet other team members. Remember that I'm trying to write the story not just around a monk and a nun like I originally planned, but this is going to be a group. This is going to be for instance, a 5-member team like the Bad Batch in Star Wars, where every person has its own role and its own talents. And so, but that is a journey of successes. So they are actually going to be able to defeat some of the evil mages that are called Infelix. I forgot that I called them like that. And they discover that actually the Infelix have already put some people in places where they pretend to be good, but they're actually there with a very malicious reason. They're planted there by the Grand Master of the Infelix to slowly poison the country and to take over when the moment is there, when the codex is in their possession. And so Tim and Elara uncover a number of I call that Scooby-Doo moments, where Scooby and Shaggy discover who is underneath the cloak. Well, there are going to be a few moments like that where Tim and Elara are super encouraged by the fact that they've been able to successfully defeat a few of those like kind of minor enemies. Again, I'm talking about the big picture, not about all the details. But then in the let's say that there is the third act, everything goes in reverse. And instead of winning, they start to lose. And it gets really, really painful for Tim, because he is going to lose almost everything. He's going to even lose Elara, who is tempted by Furtivus and joins kind of the dark side. And now Tim is all alone, and he's discouraged, and he thinks he can never, ever make it. And then we also follow Furtivus and Elara, who now join the Master, the Grand Master. But that turns out to be a horrible failure and a disillusion as well, because they're humiliated. They're not at all. It's not at all what they thought it would be. So they too, at the end of Act 3, are in the depths, literally in the depths of the dungeons of the evil abbey. And then the fourth act is, of course, the big battle, where Tim is encouraged by the two other members of the group. They kind of show him how to deal with situations like that. He discovers about himself, like, I can do this. He learns to trust himself. And then on the other hand, Elara and Furtivus, they are actually rock bottom, and they realize that this was a wrong choice, and they start the journey up. And it's literally, they're going to go from the dungeons up to the surface, and they're going to join Tim in the end, and everybody comes together, and that's going to be the big fight. And that's going to, I've got some amazing ideas for that, because that's going to take part both in the story spell, but also, and this is the new thing that I came up with, there are gradations of story spells. So the regular story spells that we see in the book, and that we see Tim and Elara cast once they know how to do that, that's basically you disappear in a world for a moment. The rest of the real world is in pause, in a loop, at least surrounding the the one who casts the story spell. But then there is a much more serious story spell, and that is the one that you can cast with the Codex Fabulae. And the big difference with regular story spells, where, you know, in a story spell, you can still gain strength, and so there have to be rewards. You know, I've learned this from video games. So after each of these initial battles, there's going to be loot. And loot can be literally an object or a weapon that they find, or a spell that they discover, or maybe a clue. They discover where maybe the codex is and who took it. But in the final story spell is very different, in a sense that because of the power of the codex, what happens in the story actually has an impact on the real world, which means if you die, it's kind of like the Matrix. If you die in a story spell, if you're defeated, you also die in the real world. If monsters appear in the story spell, because of course the Grand Master is going to poison the power of the codex, or he's going to try to poison the story well. These monsters will also appear in the real world, and so the stakes are tremendous. And that is where, you know, you're going to have that final confrontation between the Grand Master, who is now he is hiding inside that story spell. And then obviously it's going to end well. But so that's basically the 4 acts. And I know that I left out almost all the details, including, you know, the characters that I already came up with, like the mentor figure. And now I'm wondering, well, if I'm going to make like a classic 5-member team, then maybe I shouldn't kill off the mentor. Maybe he survives. And what about that, you know, that younger sister, that kind of nerdy, very creative sister, religious sister? Maybe it's Alara's real sister, and maybe the boy, you know, the boy who's always sick, maybe that is Tim's real brother. I don't know yet, but I kind of feel like I have to put that a little bit more in the second act, because if I introduce the entire team in the first act, it's going to be really front heavy, and it's going to be way too many characters, too much exposition, so currently thinking, well, maybe these 2 younger the brother and the sister get abducted or whatever, and that will give Tim and Alara a much more important reason to leave the monastery, because it's no longer just about the codex, which is just a thing, and it's important, but it's important because I say that as an author. But if it's their family that they need to recover, that gives them an emotional reason to heed the call. I think that's more powerful. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. And then finally, I wanted just to briefly react to a question that I got in the comments. And that was, so how do I combine this whole project of writing a fantasy novel with my work and my life as a Catholic priest? And I actually just wrote, that's another thing that I did today. I wrote an article in the parish bulletin here, because I serve as an assistant priest in a number of church locations. So we've got this big merged parish. And there are hundreds of parishioners that follow me also on social media. So I felt like, let me explain why I do this. And I said, for me, writing, and especially writing fiction, is very much akin to dreaming and to prayer. So what do you do when you pray? You envision a world that is better than the one you're currently in, right? That's, of course, prayer is much more than that. But a lot of people pray to God, asking him for, let's say, peace on earth. And there is no peace on earth. But they pray for it. So in their prayer, they already envision it. In our dreams, it's the same thing. We can dream about stuff. I can dream about my next vacation and just think of all the places that I could go. It's not there. I have to work. It's winter. But I can already dream of, being in Spain and walking part of the Camino in beautiful sunny weather. That dream pulls me forward. And with writing, I explain in the parish bulletin, it's very much like that. I feel like I'm writing a story about a world that is not the world in which we live. That's why it's called fiction. That's why it's fantasy. But at the same time, I envision a world that could be, and that maybe even can be. It's a world in which you have to put faith. You have to push away your disbelief. That's what you do when you read fiction. You step away from it. And so for me, both writing and reading fiction is very close to an act of faith. I think it's actually a way in which we can grow our faith. Because when we read fiction, we entrust ourselves to this imaginary world of a writer, of an author, of a creator. And we hope that author is not going to disappoint us, is not going to betray the values that we see in that story. And that is very important. I mean, a lot of us are very attached to the books that we love and read over and over again. It's because they touch upon the things that are truly important to us. If it's just entertainment, you read it once and you forget about it. But why do we keep reading Tolkien? Why do we go back to these stories? Why do we read the Bible for 2,000 years? More than 2,000 years if you count it, the First Testament. It's because these stories are not just about the past. They are about our present and our future relationship with God and with one another. Those Bible stories paint a picture of a world the way God dreams it, the way God envisions it. And he asks us to join him. And that's how I see my role as a priest in this. Priests are storytellers. They pass on the stories from the Bible and they infuse it with their own life experience, with their own interpretation, and they connect it with the life of the faithful, right? That's what we're translators or storytellers. In my book, it's similar. I mean, my book is obviously fantasy, but it's based on the premise, like, we know all these stories of incredible miracles that these saints could do. I just read about this guy whose island I visited his church, the remains of it on Omi Island on the west coast of Ireland, and I was there with an archaeologist, and he said, you know, these saints, this guy was known for being able to influence the weather. He could multiply food. He could heal people. He would even be able to keep sea monsters away. And while he was telling me all that, I thought, well, you know what? What if we envision a world in which all that can really happen? And it's not just legend. It's not just mythology. What if the power of faith is so strong that it can actually do these miracles? I mean, look at the Bible. Look at the New Testament. It's not just Jesus who does miracles. The apostles do them as well. So, you know, why not create a world and a story in a world where all that is actually happening? And so that's kind of my challenge. And it's envisioning a world where faith actually really gives you power. Not obviously. I mean, I don't think it's very useful for people to be able to influence the weather. I think there's more strength in helping people to accept the weather that they get instead of cursing God for it. But seriously, I believe that through, I base this on the way that Tolkien talks about fairy tales. And he says, you know, fairy tales have an incredible inherent power. Yes, they're made up, but at the same time, they can give hope in hopeless situations. And he gives an example of a prisoner reading a book of fiction. And in that book, he reads stories about, you know, faraway countries and blue skies and freedom. And that gives him the power to hold on and to not give up and to hope that one day he will be free of that prison. And Tolkien says that is the power of storytelling. That's why you should never discard fiction. That's why you should never discard fantasy. It's a gift to people in a difficult situation because it makes them believe in a different world, in a world beyond this world. And isn't that something that priests are supposed to do? Anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you. So all in all, quite a day, but I still think it was a good day. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.